The gym buzzed with the sound of gloves hitting pads and shoes squeaking against the mat. The air was thick with sweat, determination, and pride. Among the fighters stood Ethan, a man known for his confidence that bordered on arrogance. He had power, he had speed, and he had a reputation for making his opponents tap quickly. Every newcomer who stepped into the ring with him left humbled and sometimes bruised. That was exactly how Ethan liked it. Until the day a new face walked through the door, a woman named Lila. She was soft-spoken, quiet, almost invisible as she walked across the mat to greet the coach. Her hair was tied back neatly, her posture calm, her presence gentle. Ethan barely looked at her at first, assuming she was a beginner who would quit after one class. But as the coach introduced her to the group, a few people whispered quietly, saying she had trained elsewhere before. Ethan smirked to himself. He had seen this before, people claiming experience only to fold under real pressure. When class began, everyone paired up to spar, and to his surprise, the coach matched Lila with him. Ethan raised an eyebrow, glancing at her small frame and soft eyes. "You sure about this, coach?" he asked with a grin. "She looks like she belongs in a yoga class, not here." The coach just smiled. "You might want to be careful with that one," he said softly, then stepped aside. Lila bowed politely before stepping into position, her eyes steady but kind. Ethan chuckled, trying to shake her confidence with a few playful taunts, but she didn't react at all. The bell rang and Ethan moved fast, lunging forward with the confidence of someone who thought he already won. But before he knew it, she wasn't there. Lila slipped past his attack like water flowing around stone, her movements smooth and controlled. Ethan turned quickly, trying to grab her again, but she redirected his motion, using his strength against him. In one swift motion, she swept his leg and brought him down, landing lightly beside him before locking him in a tight hold. Ethan struggled, muscles tense, face turning red as he tried to break free, but the pressure only increased. The room went quiet except for the sound of his hand tapping the mat. Tap, tap, tap. Lila released him instantly, standing and bowing again, her expression calm, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Ethan sat up, breathing hard, his pride stung more than his body. The other fighters watched in stunned silence, whispering among themselves, some trying to hide their smiles. He looked up at her, disbelief in his eyes. "You got lucky," he said between breaths. She simply smiled softly and said, "Luck has nothing to do with balance." Then she offered him a hand to help him up, and he hesitated before taking it. The coach clapped once, breaking the silence. "Good match," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. Ethan stood, brushing himself off, his thoughts spinning, his ego bruised, yet something deep inside him shifting. He had never been handled like that, not by anyone, and especially not by someone who moved with such quiet grace. When class ended, Ethan found himself watching her from across the room as she helped another student adjust their stance, her tone patient, her movements precise. There was something about her calm that unsettled him, not because it was weak, but because it was powerful. He realized that what she had done was not luck, it was control. True control, the kind he had spent years trying to master through force instead of understanding. As he picked up his bag and turned to leave, he caught her glance once more, and for the first time he nodded in respect. She returned the gesture with the faintest of smiles before turning back to her training, her focus unbroken, her calm untouchable. The next day, Ethan arrived at the gym earlier than usual. He told himself it was just another day of training, but deep down he knew why he was there. He wanted to understand how someone so quiet, so gentle could move with such precision and confidence. When Lila walked in, she greeted the coach with her usual soft smile and began stretching silently on the mat. Ethan hesitated for a moment before walking over to her, trying to sound casual. "Hey Lila, about yesterday, good match," he said, scratching the back of his neck. She looked up and smiled politely. "Thank you, Ethan, you did well too." He laughed awkwardly. "I wouldn't say that you had me on the mat in seconds." She tilted her head slightly. "It's not about strength or speed, it's about feeling the rhythm and staying calm." Her voice was steady, like the surface of still water. Ethan sat down across from her, watching how easily she moved, how every stretch flowed into the next without effort. "Can you teach me that rhythm?" he asked finally. She looked at him thoughtfully for a moment, then nodded. "If you are willing to listen and not just fight." He nodded without hesitation, and that was how their training together began. At first, Ethan struggled. Every time he tried to overpower her, she would just slip away and leave him grasping at air. Every time he lost patience, she would remind him softly, breathe, don't fight the flow. Days turned into weeks, and slowly something in him began to change. He found himself focusing less on domination and more on control, less on strength and more on awareness. One afternoon, as the sun streamed through the windows, casting golden light across the mats, Ethan managed to counter one of her moves smoothly for the first time. Lila smiled. That was better. She said, you moved with your breath, not your anger. Ethan grinned, feeling a sense of pride that was different from victory. It was calm, steady, and real. After class, the two sat side by side, sipping water in the quiet gym, the hum of the air conditioner the only sound between them. You know, Ethan said finally, I used to think fighting was about showing who's stronger, but you made me realize it's more about knowing yourself. Lila looked at him with her calm eyes and said softly, that's the hardest fight of all, the one within. Her words stayed with him, echoing in his mind long after they left the gym that day. Each time he trained after that, he carried that calm with him, letting it guide every move, every breath, every strike. He no longer fought to win, he fought to grow. And though he still had his pride, he now had something more powerful than that: respect. Weeks passed, and Ethan's transformation became noticeable to everyone in the gym. The other fighters who once followed his loud and confident lead now watched as he moved with quiet focus, mirroring the calm presence that Lila carried so effortlessly. The coach noticed it too, the way Ethan no longer rushed, the way his strikes had softened, yet carried more precision and intent than ever before. One evening after training, the coach pulled him aside and said, I haven't seen you like this before, Ethan. What changed? Ethan glanced toward Lila, who was helping a new student adjust her stance, then looked back at the coach with a faint smile. She did. The coach nodded knowingly. She's a rare kind of fighter, calm enough to hear what most people miss. Ethan took those words to heart and continued learning from her, not just in movement, but in mindset. Outside of the gym, he found himself reacting differently to things that once angered him. He spoke slower, he thought deeper, he carried himself with quiet confidence. It was as if Lila's stillness had spread into every part of his life. One day, after a long session, Lila invited him to join her for tea at a small cafe near the gym. They sat by the window watching people pass by, the city alive around them, but their space calm and still. You're not the same as when I met you, she said softly, stirring her tea without looking up. Ethan smiled a little. I hope that's a good thing. She nodded at his strength without calm is just chaos. You found your balance. He looked down at his cup, her words sinking deep into him, more meaningful than any compliment he had received before. When they returned to the gym later that week, the coach announced an upcoming exhibition match, a friendly event between different schools. He looked directly at Lila and Ethan. Both of you should represent us, he said. It will be good for the younger students to see how much you've grown. Lila's expression remained calm, but Ethan could see the faint spark in her eyes. She agreed with a quiet nod. As the days went by, they trained harder, refining their techniques, pushing their timing to perfection. Sometimes Lila would stop mid-spar to remind him of a detail he missed, and he would listen carefully, adjusting his movement until she nodded in approval. The respect between them grew stronger than words could describe. On the morning of the match, the gym was alive with energy. Fighters from different schools filled the space, the smell of mats and warm-up oil thick in the air. Ethan tightened his gloves, glancing at Lila across the room. She was stretching silently, her movements as graceful as ever, her face calm like still water before a storm. When her eyes met his, she gave a small, reassuring smile, and he nodded, feeling a surge of focus settle over him. He wasn't nervous, not anymore. He was ready to fight, not for pride, not to prove himself, but to honor what he had learned. As the bell rang and the crowd hushed, he took his first step onto the mat, breathing slow and deep, just like Lila had taught him. The match began with a rush of motion, the sound of bare feet sliding against the mat, the heavy breathing of two fighters circling each other. Ethan kept his eyes steady, every muscle in his body awake, but not tense, his movements patient and measured. His opponent lunged forward, testing him with quick jabs and sudden grabs, but Ethan flowed around each attack like water, bending and redirecting every strike without force. The crowd watched in quiet awe. The same man who used to fight with pride and loud energy was now calm, silent, and precise. From the side of the mat, Lila stood watching, her hands folded, her gaze calm and steady. She could see every adjustment, every choice he made. When the opponent tried to overpower him, Ethan shifted low, swept the leg, and transitioned smoothly into a hold, locking the arm tight, but with control. The moment of silence before the tap echoed through the gym like a heartbeat. Tap, tap, tap. Ethan released the hold immediately, standing and bowing, his breathing deep, but even his expression calm and respectful. The referee raised his hand, signaling his victory, and the crowd erupted in applause. But Ethan didn't smile. He simply turned toward Lila and nodded once, a quiet thank you carried in the gesture. When she approached him after the match, she said softly, "You moved like yourself, not like anyone else. That's how it should be." He looked at her with quiet pride. "I just followed what you taught me, calm breath, focus, and balance." She smiled. "That's all it ever takes." The coach clapped them both on the shoulders, proud of how far they had come. The energy in the gym filled with admiration. Later that evening, after the matches ended, the gym grew quiet, the mats empty except for Ethan and Lila sitting side by side, the faint hum of the lights above them. "Do you ever miss competing for glory?" he asked, after a moment, his tone thoughtful. Lila shook her head slowly. "Glory fades, peace stays," she said softly. "It's better to win within than to win a crowd." Her words lingered in the air, filling the silence with meaning. Ethan nodded, understanding it completely, his eyes drifting toward the reflection of the two of them in the mirror across the room. Two fighters, one calm and one once cocky, now both balanced like opposite sides of the same coin. Outside, the night deepened, the city lights shimmering beyond the window as the sound of soft rain began to tap gently against the glass. Lila stood first, slinging her gym bag over her shoulder. She turned to him, her voice quiet but warm. "Same time tomorrow." Ethan smiled. "Yes, same time tomorrow." As she walked out into the rain, her calm presence seemed to fill the space, even after she was gone, leaving behind a sense of stillness that felt like peace itself. Ethan stayed there a little longer, sitting on the mat, letting the sound of rain guide his thoughts, knowing that the lesson she had given him would stay long after the mats were rolled up and the lights went dark. The next morning, the air outside was cool and clear, the streets still wet from the rain that had fallen through the night. Ethan arrived at the gym before anyone else, unlocking the door and stepping inside the quiet space that had become his second home. He dropped his bag on the bench and stood still for a moment, breathing in the faint scent of mats and sweat and determination. The stillness reminded him of his first days there, the noise, the laughter, the arrogance that used to fill him, the version of himself that no longer existed. He began his warm-up, moving through slow, deliberate motions, each breath syncing with the rhythm of his body, each movement flowing into the next like the steady current of a stream. When the door opened behind him, he didn't need to turn. He already knew it was Lila. "Morning," she said softly, setting her bag down beside the wall. "Morning," Ethan replied, a faint smile forming as he kept his focus on the motion of his stance. She joined him silently, both of them moving through their drills in perfect unspoken harmony, the sound of bare feet on the mat echoing through the quiet gym. After a while, they paused, standing opposite each other, their breathing slow, and even their eyes meeting with the familiar spark of mutual respect. "Ready?" she asked. "Always," he replied. They began to spar, not with force, but with rhythm, each testing the other's timing, balance, and patience, the match flowing like a dance, every movement connected to the next. Neither spoke, neither needed to. The silence between them was its own language, a conversation of skill and trust and quiet strength. When they finally stopped, both slightly out of breath, they shared a quiet laugh, the kind that comes from shared effort rather than victory. "You're learning fast," she said, wiping her brow, her eyes bright with approval. "I've had a good teacher," Ethan replied, his tone sincere. Lila shook her head. "It's not about the teacher, it's about how much the student listens, and you listen well now." Her words carried weight and warmth, and for a moment the space between them felt filled with something deeper than training, something like friendship and understanding born from respect. The coach entered the gym, just then, clapping his hands together. "Good to see you both already working," he said, smiling. "You two are becoming the example everyone here looks up to." Lila bowed slightly. Ethan nodded quietly, pride flickering in his eyes, but it was different from before, gentler, steadier. As more students began to arrive, the room filled with life again, the rhythm of training returning, but beneath the noise a calm foundation remained. Ethan and Lila moved through it together, their connection steady, like the quiet pulse of the gym itself. Later, as the sun began to set, and the others left one by one, they stayed behind training until the light turned golden across the mats. The world outside seemed distant, as if time had slowed around them. Ethan watched her move, every gesture precise yet effortless, and he thought about how strange it was that someone so soft-spoken could change everything without ever raising her voice. When she finally stopped and turned toward him, her calm eyes caught his, and she said quietly, "Strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers." He nodded silently, knowing those words would stay with him longer than any fight or victory ever could. The light in the gym grew softer as the sun dipped below the horizon, shadows stretching long across the mats. Ethan stood still for a moment, letting the words she had spoken settle deep into him. They echoed in his mind like a steady rhythm. Strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it whispers. He felt the truth of it in every quiet breath, every slow beat of his heart. Lila walked to the corner of the mat and sat down, her posture relaxed, her eyes thoughtful, watching the faint glow of evening through the window. Ethan joined her, sitting beside her in silence for a while, neither of them speaking, both content in the stillness that filled the room. "You ever think about why you started all this?" he asked finally, his voice low and calm. Lila looked down at her hands for a moment, then answered softly, "I started because I was afraid, and I wanted to understand what fear really was, not fight it, but know it." Ethan nodded slowly. "I think I started because I wanted to prove something. I thought winning would make me feel strong, but it never did, not really." She turned to him, her expression gentle. "Then, what makes you feel strong now?" He smiled faintly, "Balance and calm, knowing I can control myself no matter what happens around me." She returned his smile. "That's real strength, the kind most people never find." Outside, the sound of crickets began to rise, the night slowly taking over the city, the gym lights casting a warm glow over the mats. Ethan leaned back, resting on his palms, his gaze distant. "You ever think about competing again?" he asked. Lila shook her head slowly. "I used to chase medals, but now I just want peace. If I can teach someone else to find that, then I've already won." Her words carried a weight that felt larger than the room itself, and Ethan understood them completely. He looked at her and saw not just a fighter, but someone who had mastered something far beyond technique. She had mastered herself. The door creaked open, and the coach stepped in, glancing at the two of them sitting quietly in the dim light. "You two are still here," he said, smiling. "You must really love this place." Ethan laughed softly, "Yet feels more like home now." The coach nodded. "Good fighters find strength in noise, great ones find it in silence, and you two are on your way there." After he left, the gym fell quiet again, only the faint hum of the lights remained. Lila stood and began folding her gi carefully, the way she always did, neat and deliberate, every motion a reflection of her discipline. Ethan watched her for a moment before saying, "I think I finally understand what you meant about rhythm. It's not just in movement, it's in everything." She looked up. "Yes, it's in how you live, how you breathe, how you handle what life throws at you." He smiled softly, then helped her gather the rest of the mats, stacking them neatly against the wall, the work simple but grounding. When they were done, they stood by the doorway for a moment, neither wanting to leave the calm that surrounded them. "See you tomorrow," Lila said, her tone light but steady. "Yet tomorrow," Ethan replied, his voice filled with quiet certainty. As she stepped out into the cool night air, the faint breeze carried the scent of rain, again the kind of scent that reminded him of new beginnings. He stayed behind for a moment longer, standing in the doorway, watching the reflection of streetlights flicker across the wet pavement, knowing this journey was far from over, that every lesson she taught him had only just begun. The next morning, the sky was painted with soft gray clouds, the air cool and quiet, as if the world itself had paused to breathe. Ethan arrived at the gym early again, unlocking the door and stepping into the familiar calm that waited inside. He placed his bag on the bench and began his warm-up slowly, letting his breath match his movement, feeling every stretch and shift in his muscles. When Lila arrived, she carried a thermos in one hand, her calm smile appearing as soon as she stepped onto the mat. "You're early again," she said lightly, setting the thermos down beside her bag. "Couldn't sleep," Ethan replied, "just felt like I needed to move." She nodded, understanding without question, and began to stretch beside him, the two moving in quiet sync, their bodies flowing with ease born from practice and trust. After a few minutes, she handed him a cup from the thermos, the faint scent of green tea rising with the steam. "Try this," she said, "it helps clear the mind before training." He took it gratefully, sipping the warm liquid. It tasted simple and clean, just like her presence, calm and grounding. They began sparring not with intensity, but with rhythm, a dance of quiet exchanges, each movement purposeful and fluid. Every now and then Lila would stop and adjust his stance or correct a small detail, her touch light, her voice steady, guiding him with patience. Ethan listened closely, feeling how every correction connected to something deeper, not just in his body, but in his thoughts. As they paused to catch their breath, he said softly, "You ever notice how the mat teaches more than people do?" Lila looked at him, her expression thoughtful. "Yes, because the mat doesn't lie, it shows you exactly who you are every time you step on it." Her words struck him in a way that only truth can, simple yet powerful. He nodded. "I used to fight the mat too, always trying to force it to bend to me. Now I just try to listen to it." "That's growth," she said with a faint smile, "the kind that doesn't come from victory, but from awareness." The coach entered a little later, watching them with quiet pride. He didn't interrupt, just stood for a while, arms folded as they moved with near-perfect balance. Finally, he spoke. "When they stopped, both of you have come far, but I think it's time for something more." Ethan looked at him, curious. "More?" The coach nodded. "There's a regional seminar next month. Some of the top instructors from around the country are attending. I want you both to go represent the gym." Lila raised her eyebrows slightly, a hint of surprise flickering in her calm expression. Ethan looked toward her, waiting for her reaction. She stayed silent for a moment, then said softly, "If you're going, I'll go." He smiled. "Deal." The coach grinned. "Good, then it's settled. I'll make the arrangements." After he left, the two stood quietly in the middle of the mat, the weight of what lay ahead sinking in. Ethan turned to her, his tone gentle. "You think we're ready?" Lila's eyes softened. "Readiness isn't about how strong you are, it's about how still you can be when everything around you moves." He let out a slow breath, then nodded, her words settling deep inside him once again. They bowed to each other and resumed training, their movements flowing under the fading light as the sound of their steady breathing filled the room like a calm heartbeat that refused to break. The weeks leading to the seminar passed in quiet rhythm, each day unfolding with the same calm focus that had defined their journey together. Ethan and Lila trained side by side every morning before sunrise and every evening until the light faded from the windows, the soft echo of their movements blending into the stillness of the gym. There was no rush, no noise, only purpose. The day of the seminar arrived bright and clear, the city awake with motion and chatter, but inside Ethan felt nothing but still calm, the kind of peace that comes from knowing you have nothing to prove. He and Lila stepped into the large training hall, mats stretching across the floor, rows of fighters warming up, the air filled with anticipation. When their turn came to demonstrate, the coach gave them a nod of quiet confidence, and they stepped forward together, bowing in unison before the crowd. The room fell silent as they began to move, their sparring smooth and fluid like a dance built from balance and trust, every motion controlled, every breath steady. Lila moved with her usual grace, her calm radiating through every shift and turn. Ethan mirrored her perfectly, their rhythm flowing like water through stone, unstoppable yet soft. The demonstration ended with a simple hold, precise, clean, and respectful, no show of strength, no force, just mastery. For a heartbeat, the hall was silent, then the applause came loud and warm, filling the space with admiration. The coach's proud smile said more than words ever could. As they stepped off the mat, Lila turned to Ethan, her eyes bright with quiet satisfaction. "See what calm can do." He smiled back. "It can move mountains." Later that evening, they returned to their own gym, the familiar scent of the mats greeting them like home. They sat together in silence, drinking tea the same way they had so many times before, the golden light of sunset spilling across the floor. Ethan looked toward her after a long pause. "You changed everything, you know that." She shook her head softly. "No, you changed yourself. I just reminded you how." He smiled at that, her words simple and true. Outside, the world moved on, traffic sounds fading into the distance, the day giving way to night. Inside the gym, all was still, calm and whole. Lila stood, gathered her things, and paused at the door, her voice low but steady. "Strength doesn't always roar, remember that." Ethan nodded. "I will always." She gave him a small smile and stepped out into the fading light, disappearing into the quiet evening, her calm presence lingering long after she was gone. Ethan stood alone in the empty gym, breathing deep, the air that carried her lessons still echoing around him. He looked at the mat beneath his feet, the same mat that had once held his pride and his frustration, and now held only peace. For the first time in his life, he felt no need to fight for recognition or control. He had learned what true strength was. Not power, not dominance, but balance, patience, and calm. And as the last light of day slipped away, Ethan smiled quietly to himself, knowing that wherever he went from here, her lesson would follow, like a steady heartbeat whispering strength doesn't always roar, sometimes it moves in silence.